I'm asking you one last time, where is he? Michael's voice cut through the silence. His eyes were afire, wild, furious, and I felt them burrowing into me, searching for answers I couldn't give. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat like a drum, each thud an explosion of guilt. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Michael, you're being ridiculous, I stammered, my voice weak and strained, giving away the panic welling up inside me. I tried to steady my breath, but it was impossible. My chest felt tight, like the walls were closing in on me. There's no one here, I said again, but this time the words sounded hollow, like I was already drowning in my own lies. He never once broke his gaze. He wasn't buying one word of it. Those steel blue eyes cut right through me, knife sharp. These were not the eyes I once knew, filled with warmth and love. Now they were cold and unyielding. "Don't lie to me, Angela," he said in a low and dangerous tone. "I know what is going on. Don't think that I haven't seen you." His words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of me. I flinched, but I couldn't hide from him. He knew. He knew everything, and I was caught. "You think I haven't noticed?" Michael continued, his voice steady but sharp, like a blade waiting to strike. "You think I'm blind?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands, my trembling body. My mind was racing, my heart thundering against my chest. I wanted to run, to scream, but I could not move. His gaze paralyzed me. The weight of his words crushed me under its unbearable truth. His eyes flicked to the nightstand. Just for a moment, a fleeting moment, I saw something shift in his expression, something that terrified me. The anger deepened, darkened. It was as if he already knew. "I saw everything, Angela," he said slowly, each word deliberate, as if savoring my pain. "The hotel receipts, the phone calls, the late nights." I gasped, a sharp intake of breath. My heart seemed to stop for a split second before it resumed, but now it was racing even faster, threatening to burst from my chest. How long had he known? How long had he been watching, waiting, gathering his evidence? The room spun around me. My mind raced for an excuse, any excuse, but none came. There was nothing. I'd been careless, reckless, thinking I could hide from him, but I was wrong. "You've been busy," I muttered. My words rattled out. It was the only defense I had left, the only thing I could say. "You've been gone for weeks, Michael. You've hardly noticed me." His face didn't change, but his eyes did. They hardened. "I've been watching you, Angela, and you knew exactly what you were doing." Those words were like a punch to my gut. I couldn't breathe. The guilt just overwhelmed me, suffocating. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was something worse. It was wounded. The kind of hurt that burrows deep into your soul and stays there, festering. "You knew all along, didn't you?" His voice was lower now, but the venom was still there, swimming in undercurrents. "You knew I was watching. You knew I would find out." There it was, plain as day. The truth out in the open between us. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. Not anymore. I was cornered, trapped in a web of lies I couldn't escape. My stomach churned, my heart sank lower and lower. He knew. He had known, and now it was too late for explanations, for apologies. I was standing there, exposed, stripped bare of every defense I had ever had. I was with him, Michael, I whispered, barely able to speak the words. I was with Ethan, that night, at the hotel. His eyes darkened. There was no shock in them, no surprise, just an unbearable sadness. And something else. Something darker. Tell me who he is, Michael demanded, his voice barely more than a whisper. But it was enough. It was more than enough. I wanted to say something. Anything. To explain. But what could I say? What could I possibly say to make this right? Nothing would fix this. Nothing would make up for what I had done. I don't know, I mumbled, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were lies. I didn't believe them. How could he? His fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles white with the effort of holding back his rage. Don't lie to me again, he spat, his voice raw, jagged. I could hardly breathe now. The weight of his words pressed upon me, reaching in and squeezing, breaking me apart piece by piece. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. Nothing but the awful, painful silence hanging the air between us. And then, just when I felt I couldn't take any more, something shifted. A rustle. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't me. It was him. For one fleeting, heart-stopping second, I saw Michael's eyes flick towards the bed. His body went rigid, his jaw clenched. He knew. He had known all along, and now it was happening. Without a word, Michael fell to his knees and reached under the bed. His eyes were wide, his breathing shallow, as if he'd already steeled himself for what he was about to find. I wanted to reach out and scream at him to stop. I couldn't. I could barely breathe. And then, just like that, there he was. Ethan. Michael was frozen. I was frozen. It was as though time just stood still. The silence in the room was suffocating. Who the hell is this, Angela? Michael's voice was low, a growl thick with incredulity and anger. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What was there to say now? What could I say to fix this? How could I apologize for making such a mess of everything? I don't know, I lied, but that was a lie too now. Michael's fists clenched at his sides, his whole body trembling with barely controlled rage. Tell me who he is, he snarled, each word slicing into me like a knife. I didn't have an answer. I didn't have anything left to say. The truth had come crashing down, and I was too far gone to make it stop. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan lay still under the bed, his face barely visible in the darkness. His presence was like a shadow hanging over the room, a secret too terrible to be spoken aloud. But Michael saw him. He had found him, and now everything was crumbling. Michael didn't move. His eyes remained locked on Ethan's figure, still, as if the sight of him had paralyzed him completely. The air was thick with tension. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, louder than the ringing in my head. The truth was out. Everything was laid bare, and there was no way to take it back. Ethan remained motionless. I could feel his panic through the floorboards, through the thin air between us. He knew what was coming. I knew what was coming, but Michael didn't move. Not yet. My mind raced, frantic thoughts colliding with each other in a haze. What had I done? What had I gotten myself into? I had been selfish, reckless, and now we were all trapped in this nightmare. No way out. No escape. Michael stood, slowly, deliberately, and the floor creaked under his weight. The sound of his movements seemed to reverberate through the room, sharp and unforgiving. His gaze never left the man beneath the bed. My chest tightened with every second that passed. I could feel the suffocating pressure building up in the pit of my stomach. "You think you can just hide from me, huh?" Michael's voice was almost too calm, too controlled. It was the kind of calm that only came before a storm. I could hear the tightness in his words, the strain of keeping his composure just barely intact. I wanted to speak, to tell him everything, to beg for forgiveness, but my throat was dry and the words wouldn't come. How could they? How could I explain this? How could I make it all right again when it had already gone so far off the rails? Michael crouched down, never breaking eye contact with me. "Do you think I'm stupid, Angela? Do you think I wouldn't notice?" His voice was quiet now, but there was a cutting edge to it, something raw and vulnerable that made it worse. I wanted to say something, anything, to stop this from spiraling further. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. Nothing came out. "Tell me who he is," Michael whispered again, his tone suddenly softer, almost like a plea. But I knew better. It wasn't a plea. It was a demand. His desperation was thicker now, like a knife in the air. I hesitated, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to say something, anything. But before I could speak, the phone rang again. The shrill sound of it sliced through the room, cutting through the tension like a blade. It was Ethan's phone, the one still sitting on the nightstand, the one Michael had already seen earlier. The ringtone felt like a taunt, a cruel reminder of the mess I had made. "Answer it!" Michael's voice was louder now, frantic with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "Answer the damn phone, Angela." I could feel my body tremble. I wanted to run. I wanted to hide. But I was stuck, bound by the lies, by the mess I had created. The phone continued to ring, louder, more insistent. The sound echoed off the walls, each ring like a drumbeat, hammering at my conscience, reminding me of the lies I had been living. Each chime felt like it was pounding the final nail into my coffin. I glanced at Ethan, still frozen beneath the bed, his eyes wide and filled with fear. He wasn't going to answer the phone. He couldn't, and I couldn't either. The doorbell rang then. It was sharp, loud, and sudden, and it startled me out of my daze. Ding dong. The sound seemed to reverberate in my chest. Each chime was like a hammer, breaking me open, exposing everything. Michael's gaze snapped toward the door. He took a step, his body tense and coiled, ready to lash out, and then he froze. His eyes locked on mine, and I saw something shift, something dark, something full of hurt and betrayal. "Is it him?" Michael's voice was barely a whisper, but the desperation in it was unmistakable. He was on the edge now, teetering. I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry and my mind was a swirl of panic. I didn't know what to say. The doorbell rang again, louder this time. Ding dong, ding dong. Michael's fingers twitched. He looked torn between the door and the man still hiding beneath the bed. I could see the weight of the situation crushing him, breaking him down, piece by piece. And then, as if everything had been building toward this moment, the footsteps outside the door froze me completely. Heavy, deliberate steps, closer and closer. And then the door burst open. I gasped, my eyes wide in shock. A team of police officers stormed into the room. They moved with precision, their eyes scanning the area as they pushed past Michael and rushed straight for the bed. "Ma'am, we've got a suspect hiding in the room," one of the officers said, his voice sharp as he reached for the bed, his hand already outstretched. I barely had time to process it. The world seemed to spin out of control, too fast for me to keep up. The chaos flooded the room, the officers moving with quick, sharp motions. They were everywhere, filling the space, making everything seem even more unreal. Michael's face twisted in confusion, then horror as he turned toward me. "What the hell is going on, Angela?" His voice cracked. The storm had finally broken. I couldn't answer him. I didn't know what was happening anymore. All I knew was that I was trapped, trapped by the lies I had told, by the secrets I had kept, and by the terrible truth that was coming to light. The officers had reached the bed now. One of them crouched down, his hand hovering over Ethan's hiding place. My breath hitched. Everything was moving so quickly now. The truth, the lies, the guilt. It was all flooding in, crashing into me all at once. And then the officer's hand disappeared beneath the bed. The officer yanked Ethan from under the bed, pulling him into the open. His eyes locked with mine, filled with fear, but it was too late. Michael was staring at him now, his eyes wide, his voice shaking. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling with disbelief. I stood frozen, guilt weighing heavily on me. I didn't know Michael," I stammered. "I didn't know who he was." The officer cuffed Ethan swiftly. "We've got warrants for his arrest," he said, his voice flat. "He's wanted for questioning in a series of incidents." Michael's face twisted in confusion and betrayal. "What's going on, Angela? Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't know what he was involved in," I whispered, my throat dry. "I didn't know." The officer turned, pushing Ethan toward the door, the situation escalating faster than I could process. Michael's eyes never left me. "Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you trust me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't answer him. The truth was too tangled, too ugly. I was caught in my lies, in my fears, and now everything was falling apart. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The words felt hollow, empty. The door slammed behind the officers, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Michael stood motionless, his back turned, the pain of betrayal settling between us like an impenetrable wall. And I was left in the wreckage, unable to fix what I had broken.